Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. My name is Matt Gordon. For those that don't know, or if you're stumbling on this video for the first time, feel free to join us on the Hidden Hockey Podcast. We're really excited to talk more about the international tournaments coming up, a lot of drafts coming up in the future. We're very excited to get into the prospect world as well as the hockey world in general, internationally and within the U.S. and Canada and North America as well. Today, we're going to talk about a few different things. So we're going to start off with the U18s. We're going to talk about the World Championships that start in Frisco, Texas next week on April 23rd and goes through May 3rd. And we're going to get into each of the rosters, talk about who the strong teams are, my medal contenders, as well as key players to watch out for that are draft eligibles, people from 2026, including some that are even 2027 draft eligible as well. So I'm very excited to talk with you about who those players are on those rosters and excited to get started. If you have questions, as always, if you're watching on recording, you're watching live, do yourself a favor. Please make sure that you're able to ask the questions you have. So put your questions in the comments. Anything else you want to talk about, we're more than welcome to talk about those things and excited to talk more with you about those things. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to go ahead here and jump into the different rosters that are available right now. So, the teams that are in play, which I'm going to load this up here. 1 second. Present invite, and then we'll start with the U18s. So for the U18s here, you obviously got Canada, Czechia, Finland, Germany, Latvia, Norway, Slovakia, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States as well. So there's a lot of different great teams in this tournament. It's usually an extremely competitive tournament, and a lot of scouts, not only in the NHL, but also NCAA scouts are going to be watching to find their next recruits as well as find the next NHL talent that's out there. So we're going to go ahead and start here and share Team Canada's at least initial camp. They don't have their finalized roster just yet, but we're going to get there. They have to get here in a few weeks. So starting out with the goaltending, they have 2 07s in Burke Hood, who had a really good late half to this year, and Jack Ivankovic, who will likely be the starter for them at the U18 level. Jack Ivankovic has already played at the U18s and did pretty well at the U18s as well. And then you have the young goalie in Colin Ellsworth, the 08, playing for the Guelph Storm in the OHL. The kid who's going to probably be the third string goalie and somebody you're going to watch going into the rest of this tournament. I really like the goaltending. I like the depth that they have there. Jack will obviously be the bell cow and really lead the squad there, but Burke Hood is another player who's really exciting, has a lot of good potential, and with the back half of this season, he might be able to pull a nice stretch here going into the rest of the tournament. Looking at their defensive unit, the two guys that really stand out to me are Jackson Smith and Ryan Lynn. Jackson Smith is a top 10 pick, in my opinion, somebody who could even be a top 5 pick going into this year's draft. I think he is by far the defenseman that will lead this core. And then going into the rest of the tournament, you have really strong 08s, the strongest 08 being Ryan Lynn. He will also be a high-impact player in the first round for the 2026 draft. Definitely a guy you want to watch out for. He's a very good WHL season, and it should be really exciting to see where he goes from here. One other player I want to mention on here as well is Carson Carrells, another Western League kid, but I really love his game. Very good all-around player. I think he's going to get a lot of eyes on him this tournament and really become a very impact player in terms of scouts in the international stage. And then looking for the forwards here, obviously you see the note there at the bottom, Michael Misa, in my opinion, the presumptive number 1 overall pick, was invited to the camp but is injured. He's not able to participate, but he may be able to come to the tournament in a few weeks. So we're riding on his recovery. Should they get Michael Misa, that's an amazing boost for them, and they're able to really find a lot more talent, a lot more offensive scoring ability, none of which they really lack. They have a really good forward roster that's here, and they're hoping for a few guys to come out of USHL camps as well as OHL, WHL, and QMJHL playoffs as well. Looking into the 9 forwards that are listed there, the 08s and Diorio and Edwards and Maboyi are all 3 guys that are all 20s, 26 eligibles. Diorio is found his way, as well as Beckham Edwards. They both found their way for the Sarnia Sting in the OHL. It's been really impressive to watch their growth and see where they've been coming into play. They look like they're impact players and could be potential first rounders going into 2026. Pierce Mabui, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Never heard an announcer actually say it, but he's an interesting player in his own right. Had a really good second half of the season, became a real breakout player for the Owen Sound attack on a roster that didn't necessarily have the greatest year, but you're looking at him as a piece for next year, and this is a really key opportunity for him. Another 2026 guy to watch out for is Ryan Rubrick. I've watched him since he was about 14, caught a couple of games of his live. Really good player, big frame kid, but you're wondering what kind of player you're getting out of Ryan Rubrick. Are you going to get the elite Ryan Rubrick, who's proven to be somebody who has a top 2, top 3 talent? Or are you getting the Ryan Rubrick who can score 3 goals one game and then not be impactful at all in the next game? Obviously playing with his teammate Brady Wesselin, who's a 2026 eligible as well. Both of those players are very impact players that could do a lot of damage here for the tournament, and I'm really excited to see what they're able to do. I think they're also hoping for guys like Porter Martone to make the roster. They might look to see if some other 07s are able to come into play here. Maybe a Cole Reshny makes it out of the playoffs and he's able to find his way on this roster. Should be really interesting what kind of players come out for their eventual roster. But of their roster right now, I think they're a really strong candidate to be a medal favorite. I would think they're probably going to be silver medalists. That's where I'm going to place them for now. But it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of team comes out of Team Canada this year. They're always putting together a really good roster. Going into now the Czechia roster, you look closely here. They look at the late-born 09 there in Lucas Cochlear. He's one of their young defensemen, somebody who is a 2027 draft eligible, which is really impressive. I'm very curious to see what he's able to do going forward in this tournament. This is a big step for him to take this leap into U18 play. I think he's one of the better 09s across the world. I don't know that he is going to be ready for the U18 level just yet, but we'll see what happens. It's a big deal to have him be on this roster, and I think it speaks to the growth and the talent that he has. A really good skater. He has good overall potential. Should be really fun to watch him going into the rest of this tournament. If you look at the rest of the roster here, Simon Katalicki is another guy who's been playing in Finland and playing really well, another 2026 eligible player. Should be interesting to see what he's able to do at the U18 level. I think he's going to be an impact player for the Czechs. Definitely will fit into their top 6. That'll be fun to watch and see where his game will go. Vladimir Trevecki is another guy who should be a really impact player at this tournament. I like his game. I like his overall skill set. He's a great skater. Definitely will be able to move the puck. Might be paired with somebody like Cochlear. It should be fun to see what kind of player and what kind of pairing those two would be matched together. Both excellent skaters. Both can break out the puck well. I would have to think that's going to be a consideration by the Czech coach. Matej Pekar is another player as well that should be watched, as well as Vit Sahecki. Both of them Western Hockey League players. Both of them, you can see the exact same size, but it should be interesting players to watch going into the rest of this tournament. Adam Banach is somebody who's come in and done really well at the USHL level. Obviously, still not fit for the pro game. He's a smaller player at 5'7" and 160 pounds. You're hoping for him to get a little bit bigger as he goes into the rest of his career, but he's somebody who's going to be finding his game, going to be wanting to be a really dominant player at this level, and somebody who has to really prove himself in order to be put into the first round here in the National Hockey League draft. He's a 2025 draft eligible, somebody who's going to be looking to have a huge performance in this tournament, and I would expect him to be one of the more pressure-packed performances, in terms of what he has to do to improve his draft stock. But there's a lot to like with Adam Banach. He's an incredibly skilled player, somebody who should be a leader on this team. I'm very excited to see what he's able to do and what he's capable of. Overall, looking at their roster, as far as goaltending goes, Stebatic should be the guy that leads this roster. Not really sure. Trejbal might get some starts. I don't know much about Michael Orsolak, but, Andrei Stebatic should get a lot of the starts here for the Czech team. I think this team will fail to medal. I don't really love the defensive units outside of Cochlear and Trevecki. I think there's some work that has to be done. And, in terms of the players that are here. A lot of people are going to be looking at Radim Mrka to see what he's able to do through the tournament. I don't know that he's as highly thought of as he, seems to be in the public sphere. I think, looking at a guy who's 6'6" and 200 pounds, it's very intriguing to see a player that can skate at that level, but will he be able to produce offense at this level? I think it's really important that he's able to do that at this tournament in order to really solidify his draft stock in the top 10. Moving on to Finland now. Finland, we'll go ahead and preview their roster here. So waiting for their roster to load. 1 second. And then going into their goaltending, it could be, I think one of these three guys could actually start for Finland. It just depends on the coach's wants. All three are very similar goaltenders. All three of them have been very successful so far this year. As far as the draft radar for those goalies in Finland, a couple of these guys might get drafted, but they are undersized, but very skilled goaltenders nonetheless. I think this is kind of their weak spot on their team. It'll be, it's stable, but it's not the greatest goaltending unit that they can put out there. It should be really interesting to see what they're able to do and how they're able to combine this into a really good goaltending unit. Looking at their defensive core is a lot weaker than I'm used to seeing from Finland. I would actually argue that their best player is the U18 and Juho Pipparainen. 6'3", 200 pounds, real breakout player. I think he's going to get a lot of eyes on him in this tournament. Should be fun to see what kind of skill sets this kid can show at the U18s. I think he is somebody who has not been seen by the general public a lot, especially because he's playing at the U18 level in Finland, which doesn't get the visibility that the U20 level gets. I think he will have a really interesting tournament going into this. I think he will have more of an impact for this group, and it should be really exciting to see what he's able to do going into the rest of this tournament. Another two players to watch out for are Lassi Biolis and Jesper Kotaharvi. Both of those guys are going to be expected to be leaders on this roster and guys who will improve the depth of the offense within Finland and various other things. So going into their forward group now, one guy to really look at is Max Westergaard. A Finn playing in Sweden, which is not that common. In fact, they have a couple of Finns that play in Sweden on this roster. Max Westergaard, to me, though, seems to be a guy who should be an impact player at this level. I love his game. I love what he brings to the table. I think he's very offensively gifted. Looking at some of the teammates he'll have, Matthias Vähäinen is a guy who is a personal favorite of mine. I think he will be a really impactful player. I ranked Eetu Orpana very highly going into the early part of the year. He's kind of struggled at the U20 level along with Yasu Mensinen. Both of those guys did not have the impact that I was expecting through the year. The forward group here is a little bit weaker than what I'm used to, but those guys should lead the force for Finland, and it'd be interesting to see what they're able to do. If they're able to play like a typical Finnish team, they might sneak a bronze. More than likely, I think they're right around where Czechia is at, and I think they're going to find themselves somewhere in 4th or 5th place. Going into now the German roster, looking at their goaltending here, nobody of note that's really a strong goaltender out of this group. The only one I'm really familiar with is Lucas Sturman. Sturman has had a decent career at the German junior level. I think he will struggle here at the U18s, so I think their roster is a little weak there, but they do have a decent defense. Max Bleicher is a guy who has played at the OHL level, has been able to handle himself and acquit himself quite well within the OHL. And another player to watch for, obviously, is Carlos Handel. He'll be a guy who you're expecting to really lead this group and really force them to, maybe move into a spot that won't be a relegation spot. I think they're going to be fighting for relegation. They don't have the depth that they necessarily have in the past few years. I think this is a weaker class for them, the 07s. But I think Carlos Handel is a guy who will get drafted. I think he'll probably be a 4th or 5th round guy, but there's a lot of intriguing pro skill sets that he has, and he'll be asked to lead this group. He'll be asked to, really provide the breakout and maybe be their power play one guy. There's a lot of skill within him, but he's going to be overmatched by a lot of the depth within the other teams in this tournament. So can he handle that situation? No pun intended, but can he handle it to make sure that he's able to do the things he needs to do to lead this team? out of the relegation spot. So going into their forward group, a few guys to watch out for. One guy in particular, obviously, is the clear 09 that sticks out is Max Pankin. Max Pankin is a guy who's got an absolute first rounder for 2027 as of now. Has played himself. He had gotten the German equivalent of exceptional status to play in the DNL this year. Usually 09s are not allowed, or 15-year-olds are not allowed to play in the under 20 groupings, but he was doing a phenomenal job this year and averaged almost a point per game at the U20 level, playing up against guys as early as 3, 4, 5 years older than him, which is really, really impressive. The 07s that are really impressive to watch here. I like their forward group a lot. The Grieva twins are guys who have played really well at the German junior level. They've been 80 points in like 30 games, something in that realm, averaging almost 2.5 points per game. Their foot speed's a little lacking. I don't know that they're necessarily pro players, but I think they're going to be excellent DEL players in time. We saw what David Lewandowski did at the under-20s. I thought he had an excellent game against the U.S. in the games I watched of him. He's been a very impact player. I would expect he's going to get a late-round flyer from somebody within the level. Obviously, you look at Elias Schneider, Maxime Schaefer, Mateusz Spaeth, and then Sebastian Zwickel are all players that should be really impactful. But I think the key player that's going to really impact them the most is Dustin Wilhoft. I would expect him to need to have a major role for this team to get out of relegation. Just like Handel has to handle the defense, Wilhoft will have to be a very impactful player for them to survive relegation. I think he fits at this level really well. He should really impact the level immensely. I think he'll help to provide them in situations where he can carry pucks. Despite the fact he's 5'6", 5'6", 5'7", like 140 pounds. I think he's a little bit smaller than what he's listed on Elite Prospects. But this is a kid who is so shifty, incredible playmaker, really smart in terms of his game. I think him and Max Pankin will be an interesting pairing to see who they put him with as well. Whoever's on that third on their line, if they're able to become a really dominant line, I think they're going to help Germany to avoid relegation and find their opportunity elsewhere. Going into Norway now, Norway is the other candidate for me that could reach into the relegation round. I would fully expect that Timrez Weston here will start for the Norwegians. He's an 08 born, huge kid at 6'5" and 190 pounds. The U18 level in Sweden, he's actually done very well. He's clearing away, I think, the starter here. He probably will play all the games for them, and I think he's been able to handle and reach players of his talent level. He should be a really impactful player for them in Norway. I think where the Germans don't have that high-end goaltender, looking at a guy like Timrez Weston is somebody who, could be a game changer for them. And he might be the guy who helps them out of relegation. But I think outside of that grouping, there's a really interesting dynamic in terms of what they're able to provide. The depth around him is going to have to be really solid, but he is a great option for them on their back end. Defensively, this is the weakest team in the tournament. There's no question there. The one guy of note is Andreas Svensson Pedersen, who is playing in the Norwegian Pro League. He is by far and away the defenseman that's supposed to hold this group together. If they do get relegated, I think it will be because of the lack of defensive depth and the lack of experience they have at the junior level. I think there's, some real opportunity here for guys to really grow here. And for these players, this is obviously probably the highest competition they've ever faced. So it should be really interesting what kind of development comes out of them, what they're able to do. Personally, I think this is going to be their downfall. And so we'll see what happens to the tournament. The Norwegians did actually beat the U.S. in a pre-tournament game, which was really very surprising. But good for them. Obviously, they have some sort of camaraderie and a team element to them, that led them to beat the that led them to beat the U.S. 4-3 after being down 3-0 last week. So, they may be a sneaky favorite here just because of the coaching and the team camaraderie here. But where the real strength of this group and why they're involved in this class in the first place is their forwards. There's a lot of really good forwards in this grouping. In particular, I'll start with Nicholas Aram Olsen. He's an 08 born. This kid is a first rounder, no question, in 2026. A lot of people don't know how good this class is for the Norwegian forwards. They're going to outscore their problems. They're going to have to do that in order to even survive in this tournament. But they have a lot of really good players that should get some draft notoriety. And obviously, Aron Molson is, I think, the cream of the crop there. Been very good at the under 20 level in Sweden. Been one of the more impactful players. I believe he's a top 20 scorer at the U20 level already as a 16-year-old, which is really impressive coming from Norway. But it should be fun to see where his growth and his development goes. But the sky's the limit for him. He's definitely a high-end player. I'm looking at him like a Nico Hischier or like a Marco Rossi. Guys who are tournament-changing players just because of the talent they have. He might be able to carry this team past the Germans, past the Latvians, past these other teams that are a little bit, in their own class, just due to his talent level and his ability. He's definitely a guy, one of the more intriguing players to watch, considering he hasn't gotten a lot of viewings from the majority of scouts. Michael Eriksson is a guy who should get some draft notoriety as well. Played really well at the under 20 level in Sweden this year. He left last year, was a little bit homesick, played in Norway, got some experience in the pro league, came back to the under 20 level in Sweden this year, and was very impressive. Should be a guy who's going to get some notoriety here in the second or third round of the draft, in my opinion. He's got a clear offensive game, good skill set, great hands. Not the fastest player, but certainly not slow. There's a lot to like here, and he should play really well at the U18 level. We can get into now Ellis Hansen is another guy who is playing at the U18s level in Sweden, but he's definitely somebody who's a U20 capable player. Should be fun to see where his growth is and what he's able to do in his game, but he should be very impactful as well. Tinas Lokoblar is another guy. He's 6'3" and 180 pounds. A bigger guy who's played at the under 20 level. I expect him to have a really good tournament. Felix Alexander Vernstad is a guy who should be he's a 2027 draft eligible player. Should be fun to watch his game and what he's able to do. Linus Lubkrig is a guy who should be really impressive as well. And then finally, another sleeper who I've been mentioned on this channel quite a bit is Romeo Edvardsson Sorensen. He's playing at the U18 level for Mora. Should be fun to watch his game, what he's able to do. He's a big forward. He should be a guy who should be a really significant net front presence. Not afraid to throw his body around, not afraid to be offensively engaged and be, in the corners and really mucking up and getting pucks where he needs to. He's a very impressive player and somebody who I think is going to find himself on the draft radar just from this tournament. Like I said, I think the strength in this group and this is similar to what the Latvians will be, is in their forwards. They have a few other guys who could be really good potential players, but it's fun to watch and fun to see where their growth is. And I think if Norway can keep the camaraderie they've had together pre-tournament, can find their opportunities to make themselves better, I think there's a lot to like with this Norwegian team. Going on here now to the Slovakian roster, we'll go ahead with the goalies here. The starter could be Michael Pradl playing for the USHL, although it wouldn't surprise me to see Hreniak here, the 08 born. Both players are very impactful players. Obviously, Pradl's a guy who's 6'5" and 200 pounds. He's a big frame, covers a lot of net, really good mover as well. Same with Hreniak. He's very similar goaltender. I look at them like Matej Tomic is a guy who was very similar in terms of his frame and his ability. I like what they both have here. It should be really fun to see what they're able to do. Going into the rest of this tournament, there's a lot to like there. Going into their defensive units, two guys that I'm really keying in on here is Luka Radojevic, playing in the USHL right now, and will go to the NCAA next year. This is a guy who's really intriguing. Should be their clear leader. Has played at the U20 level already twice. Is going to probably play in his final his final U18 tournament this year. I would expect him to be a top pairing guy and somebody who should lead the Slovakian group through. And then another player who's a dual national, is Slovakian and Polish, and Patrick Zubik. He's a guy who has come under the radar in the last 12 months or so and has really become a very impactful player. He's a great skater, 6'3" and about 200 pounds, good offensive ability. He's not played as many games as you would like him to play this year. I don't know if he battled some injury issues or what the deal was, but in the production and the things I was seeing of him, this is a kid who a few years ago was playing the Polish junior leagues. So there's been a massive progression in his development. Should see more progression within his development as well. I think there's a really high upside with him, and he should be an interesting player to watch. That's a hidden sleeper with this group. Going into the forward core now, Jan Jovan should be a really impactful player. Trenko should be a really impactful player as well. Both guys who would be expected to lead the offense. You look at Adam Nemec. Adam Nemec should do a really good job in terms of providing offense. Mikhail Sverchek should be a guy. Tobias Tomic, he'll be a 2026 eligible who's got a lot of potential along with Nemec. Both guys are going to prove to be probably first-round talents. And then the young player and Timothy Kozda, who is a 2027 draft eligible, I want to say. Really fun player who's been playing at the U16 level in North America. This is a really high-end skilled kid, somebody who you want to have your eyeballs on at all times. I think the Slovak roster is a good group. It's not necessarily the Simon Nemec, Juraj Slafkovsky, Filip Mashar group, but it is a really talented group nonetheless. And it should be fun to see what they're able to do. They're probably going to be a middling team in this tournament. I would think a 6th or 7th place is probably where they're going to fit. But there's going to be a lot of growth and great experience for these guys. And, they have the potential to really turn around a young roster next year and be very similar to what they were when they had the 04 group coming in. I think there's a lot of really good talents at the 08, 09 level that should be really impactful going into the rest of this cycle here. So the Slovaks are enjoying a really, probably a down part of their era. But overall, from like the 04s to like the 2010 birth year, there's a lot of really good players from Slovakia coming out of that level. So as long as they can stay within the top division, they'll be leaning towards being favorites in a few years. Going now into the Swedish roster, I will go ahead and show the goaltending. The goaltending here, I think they are the strongest goaltending group out of this tournament. Obviously, they're going to be led by Lube Heromstam, who's played for Latvia and has moved on and played for, I forgot who his other team is offhand right now. But Mons Goose is another guy who should get some playing time as well. Both players, all three of these goaltenders are more than capable of playing at the U18 level. They've all proven it at the U20 level in Sweden, and it should be really fun to see what they're able to do. But I think their goaltending is going to be the backbone and allow them to be a really strong team going into the rest of this tournament. Then you look at the defensive unit as well. I think it's a little bit weaker than I'm used to seeing, but there's still a really decent group here. Two guys in particular, Sasha Boumedienne. He's a U.S. and also Swedish-born player as well. I think he will find himself being a really impactful player here for Sweden at the U18s. He's already played very well for Boston University. There's a lot of good ability with him. He's going to lead breakouts. He's going to be a guy who's going to provide some power play and penalty kill action. He's a very versatile defenseman. Definitely somebody who's going to be in the 2nd or 3rd round in the 2025 draft and somebody to watch for. And then Axel Brongo Larson, who's a Swedish-Norwegian dual national. I think he's going to be an impactful player for Sweden here as well. Somebody who should really lead the group here and, be pretty impactful. And then going into the real strength of this group is in their forwards. Looking at, the 07s here, we'll talk about Theo Staksilius, Ivar Stenberg, who's the 2026 draft eligible, Melvin Novotny, Eric Nielsen, Victor Klingsell, Jacob Iznovsniak, Milton Gostrin, Eddie Genborg, Ekberg, Arvid Drott, and then, obviously the ringleader would be Anton Frundell. Anton Frundell is going to have to lead this group. He's got to be the leading scorer in this tournament. This is somebody who has to make this tournament his tournament. We've seen the up and down season he's had this year. He's had a lot of injury troubles. He's finally coming into an international tournament this year healthy. He has to make this U18s his tournament and prove why he's a top 3 pick in this draft. I think he's got the potential to be right up there with the Schaefers, the Misas, the Martones, all of them. I think he's a top 3 talent, no question. It's just a matter of can he show it at the U18 level, and I would expect him to be really dominant, especially with the depth in the forward group as well. Then another player you want to watch for that's a top 3 pick is Viggo Bork for the 2026 draft. I have him right now at 2, right behind Gavin McKenna. This is going to be his coming out party. What kind of player are we going to see out of Viggo Bork? Now that he's got a lot of talent around him, he already has a lot of talent with Djurgårdens. He's already played with a lot of these different guys. He's got chemistry with different people. What kind of player is Viggo Bork going to be at the international level? You hope that he's able to come in and be really impactful, just like Anton Frundell. But it should be really interesting to see what they're able to do the rest of this tournament. I think Sweden, to me, is probably the favorite for gold right now. I think Sweden has got a really good roster. They always prove it at the U18s. They've had many championships won at the U18 level. They, to me, seem to have the most depth across the board in terms of their goaltending and their forward group of any team in this tournament. And I think there's a lot to look at here with them. I think I think right now it's Sweden and Canada for me for gold and silver. And then we'll get into who I think will be bronze next. So going into the rest of this tournament here, we got, the U.S. roster now is up. You're looking at their goaltending is going to be their weak spot. None of these guys has really grabbed hold of the national development program in terms of being the clear starter at the U18 level. Joseph Slavik is the guy who came in late. Quinlan and Bodiger have been, guys who have had the opportunity to lead at the U18 level. They haven't really proven it to the extremes. We were used to seeing the Trey Augustines, the Spencer Knights, the Thatcher Demkos. All of these guys took and made that, number one position, their position. And nobody's really done that at the U18 level for the U.S. team. So, there's going to be a considerable weakness here. Have to see what kind of play comes out here. Going into their forward group here, I really like Chase Reed a lot. I think he's a really talented player. Charlie Trethaway will be an impactful player as well. Blake Fiddler should make an impact. He's another guy who's going to be finding himself in the first round discussion. Can he prove it with a really good tournament? This defensive group, I think, is not the strongest group I've ever seen. It's not weak, but it's not great either. Should be really fun to see where they're able to go in the rest of this tournament. Like I said earlier, they were beaten by Norway in pre-tournament games. Can this group come together and find their identity and make sure that they're a really impactful team like they normally are at the U18 level? It's going to depend on their defense. Going into their forward group, this is a really strong forward group in my opinion. You add in some of the top 08s and guys like Sammy Nelson and Mikey Burchild and Casey Mutrin. All three guys are guys that are going to find themselves in the top 60 in 2026. I think they're really impactful players. Looking at the 07 group, LJ Mooney, despite the fact he's 5'7" and 160 pounds, this is a guy who should be able to prove it really well at the U18 level. Jack Murtaugh is a guy who's looking to become a middle of the first round candidate. William Horkoff and Colin Potter, both guys who are trying themselves within the college level at early ages. Have done pretty successfully. I would expect them to be really good at this tournament. And then Ben Kavan could be a sneaky great scorer for them in this tournament. It should be really fun to see what they're able to do and the type of talent that's going to come out from them. And then two other guys who I think have a little bit more prove it that has to, a little more prove it to me kind of thing that has to happen to them in their roster and what they're able to do in the tournament. Cole McKinney is a guy who I think deserves a lot more attention, as well as William Moore. Both guys are very skilled players. Both of them, if their upsides hit the way they're supposed to, they will be looked at as first-round picks. They just have to show what they've been able to improve throughout the year. If they can do that, this U.S. team might find themselves in the bronze medal discussion, but until I see that, I have them probably going fourth. Going now to the Latvian group here. The Latvian group loaded up here, went to their U20 roster. But the key part of this roster is going to be in this 07 to 08 born group. They don't have their full roster out yet, so I'm going to give you a few players that I think are going to be really impactful here. Daniel Sirkins should be a guy who should be a really impactful player here for the Latvian roster at the U18s. Berzalkins right now is kind of a 50-50 on whether or not he's going to be in the tournament. If he's there, he should be a really impactful player. Martins Klokans should have, he had a pretty decent NHL season this year. Definitely somebody who's more than ready for the rigors of the U18 tournament. Roberts Nordines, who's a huge frame kid. He's going to get a lot of notoriety in this U18 tournament, especially if he plays really well. I think he's going to land himself on a lot of draft radars for 2027. Should be really fun to see what he's able to do. At the very least, he's a very skilled player, already playing at the U.S. prep level as a 16-year-old, which is super impressive, especially at a program like Shattuck St. Mary. And then, obviously, the big wild card in this is Olivers Murnieks. If they can get Olivers Murnieks and they can get some young talent within this Latvian roster, I think they're going to really challenge for a medal here. I think there's just interesting dynamics here. I really like them at the under 20s. I think they're going to be better at the U18 level. It should be fun. I think they're a really good spoiler upset candidate. There's a lot of depth here with the Latvian class. I think 4 or 5 guys are going to get drafted this year from Latvia. I just have this really strong feeling about their 07 class. Even some guys who didn't make the roster I really like as well. Should be fun to see what they're able to do. I think right now I have them probably closer to 6th place, 7th place, but they definitely are an upset favorite. Going now into the Swiss roster. Also don't have their permanent roster here. I'm going off of what they've used throughout the year, and then we'll show their camp roster. Looking at their goaltending here comparatively, it's the same 3 guys. These guys are all 3 in camp. Their starter will be Mattia Nico Berkler. He's come in and played really well at the Swiss under 20 level. Should be fun to see what kind of game he can bring to this under 20 level. The under 18s. I think he should be more than ready to lead this group in terms of being a really solid goaltender at this level. It should be fun to see what he's able to do. Defensively, this is another weak roster as well. I don't know that there's a really impactful player out of Sweden. I think they're going to also be somewhere in that 8th to 9th place kind of roster in terms of because of their goaltending and their defensive group. I just don't know that there's the depth that has to be there for them to really lead in this tournament. And then as far as their forwards go, this is another weak roster in terms of their forwards. I think they're really hoping for Lars Steiner to potentially make this roster. If he can, that's a massive boon for them to get him. He's been very impactful at the QMJHL level. If he can come in and be this, the savior for them in this tournament, I think that'll be immensely helpful. They get a guy like Florian Schenk, who is very experienced at the major junior level, has also been very dominant at the U20 level in Sweden. And then, Jeremiah Mundy's another kid who could be a really impactful player at this level. And then looking at the 09 class here with Jonah Neuenschwander, he made his debut at the World Juniors this year. Obviously was the youngest player in this year's World Juniors. Did pretty well, got a couple points. I think at the U18 level, this should be a point-per-game player. Definitely a top-line candidate for them for Sweden. If he's able to make an impact at 16 and be a very, point-per-game, 8 points in 5 games kind of guy, he's going to land himself in the top 5 of the 2027 draft, no question, in terms of where he's at, where his development is. He might sneak himself right under the DuPonts, right under the McCaneys, under these different prospects. He'll be right there, and he'll definitely solidify himself in the top 10 among scout size. Should be fun to see what he's able to do and what kind of player we'll see out of him going into the rest of this year. So, as far as what my top 3 teams are, I'm going to go back here to share my tab. I think I'm going to do Sweden. To me, is by far my gold medalist. I think Canada is going to be my silver medalist. And then my 3rd place team is probably going to be the United States. I think the U.S. is going to find their opportunity. They're going to sneak in here and probably get 3rd. I think Canada's got a really good roster and has a lot of depth. I think they're going to make a really intriguing gold medal game. Should be really fun to see what they're able to do. But I think that out of Group A, I think Canada is clearly going to lead that group. Probably with Canada, it'll probably finish Canada, Finland, Latvia, Slovakia, Norway. That's how I'm expecting it. And for Group B, I would think it would be Sweden, the U.S., probably the Czechs, then Sweden or Switzerland and Germany. I already talked about the impactful players from 2026, 2027. It should be a lot of fun to see what kind of talents are coming out of this draft. I think there's a ton of really good players. I think obviously selfishly the Canadians would love to get somebody like Gavin McKenna to play in the U18 tournament, but I think he, clearly he's aged out of this tournament. He's clearly too good to be in this tournament. He's already put up 20 points in this tournament already as it is. He's broken records at the U18s. Getting him back would be just a bunch of riches for them. But it's really intriguing to see what kind of player will come out of, what kind of players will come into Canada. And I think that'll make a major difference in terms of the players you want to see going into the rest of this tournament. So should be fun to see what they're able to do and the type of performances that are come out of this. I think Latvia is the team that you put on upset alert. But that being said, there's a lot of good rostered players in this tournament that are draft eligible in 2026 or in 2027. You're getting a smorgasbord of really good talented players. should be fun to watch next week. I'm very excited to see what goes forward here in the rest of this. So that's it for my preview, at least. And then I'm going to go a little bit now into the NHL Central Scouting rankings that came out in the last couple of days. These are the final rankings from NHL Central Scouting. So they're going to rank the North American skaters, goalies, international skaters, and international goalies. My thoughts are on the ranking. I'll get into that. But, any questions about the U18s? I haven't seen any on the side here. But if you do, feel free to leave them on the side, and we'll talk more about it. But very excited to see what will happen now with the U18s going into next week. I'm going to go ahead and close out some of these tabs here, and then we'll talk more about the final rankings with the NHL Central Scouting grouping. So the NHL Central Scouting group clearly put out their favorites in terms of what they have for each of the regions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so you guys can see the rankings. Going into this year's ranking, obviously the clear favorite has been Matthew Schaefer the whole year. I look at it this way. My argument stays the same. I think his sample size is too small. I don't know that he's necessarily shown enough high-end talent to prove that he's the number one overall pick. I personally have him at 4. I think I'm safe in putting him at 4. I see the high-end skill. I see the potential. I see the growth in his game. I just don't know that he's proven it at a level that is allowing him to be the number one overall pick. Whether or not that's some scrutiny, that is what it is. I would have said the same thing about Morgan Riley back then as well. That's just my personal thought on it. But I think he's a very impactful player, definitely deserving of being in the top 3, at least in North America. But I think 1's too high for him. Michael Misa to me has the profile of somebody who's number 1. I think he should have been number 1 in this ranking. I think he is the best prospect that's available. I think, his offensive upside is, been questioned a lot, and he's proven it. He's proven that he's a very good all-around player defensively, offensively. Any situation you put him in, he's been able to survive and thrive the challenges. To me, that's a clear number 1 overall pick. Whether or not it's not an exceptional player, I think a lot of people get that confused. He's a very great talent. He's an above-average talent. He's somebody who's going to be an impactful first-line player. He will not be a superstar, and that's what people need to realize. Not everyone in the first overall pick needs to be a superstar. They can be a very good player, but they don't have to be this absolute phenomenal talent that should take over the NHL immediately. Of the team of the players who I think are NHL ready, I think him and Frendell are the 2 guys to me that are the most impacted. But I'll talk more about Frendell when we get to the international roster here. 3rd here is now James Higgins. James Higgins, to me, has dropped off a little bit just because he hasn't really shown more progression. I think he's kind of stalled in his development a little bit. I think he's still a really high-end player, definitely worth a top 5 pick, no question. The hockey sense is there. The skating's there. The skill set is there. Whether or not it's elite enough to really transform into more, I don't know how much is left. I loved him at the World Juniors. I love his overall game as a whole. I still have him in my 2 spot. I think I'm willing to put him at 3. It just depends on how Frendell plays at the U18s. If Frendell really goes and puts up a similar scoring record to what Higgins did last year, which is going to be very hard to do, but if he does that, I will consider Frendell at 2. It just depends on what kind of performance comes out of the U18s and what Higgins has done this year. Going into the rest of this year, the first kind of what look I gave to this ranking was 4 and 5 here. Jake O'Brien being at 4 is super aggressive in my opinion. I like Jake O'Brien. I think he's a very impactful player. He's absolutely a first-round candidate. He is not a top 10 player. He won't be. I don't think he will ever reach that level. I think he will be a very good player out of this class. Definitely somebody, if you're looking in the teens, I think he's worth looking at. I don't see a top 10 player as Jake O'Brien. I think there's some warts in his game. I don't think he's as great of a skater as people think he is. I think he's got some warts and things he's got to work on. Now, his overall skill package enticing for sure, but I don't know that there's a really high-end group or level to more than what he has right now. He's going to be a really exceptional junior scorer. I think at the pro level, he's going to really struggle to translate his offense. Going into 5 here, Radim Mertka. Again, I don't see it. You have 3 goals in 43 games. I see a decent skater. I don't see an elite skater. He's just a lot of good. He's not a lot of great. And I think those players tend to fall more towards the first and second round. I don't know the late first, early second. I think he's overrated because of his size. I think the 6'6" thing is really throwing scouts off. I think there's less to his game than people think just because, they get enticed by the size and, look at what we can build. At the end of the day, if he could have proven it when he was 15, 16, 17, I think he'd be worthy of being a top 10 selection. Nobody really knew who Radim Mrka was outside of people from Czech until this year. And then when he moved to North America, people wanted to make a big deal of him. I personally think the late round bias and the recency bias that comes with Radim Mrka is inflating his ranking in a way that isn't really accurate. Going into the rest of this here, Porter Martone obviously makes sense where he's at. Caleb Denoyer makes sense. Roger McQueen. That whole grouping makes sense to me. They're all really high-end players, very elite, offensive, gifted talents. Should be fun to see what they're able to do and the type of players they're going to become. I think they're all got major league pro upside. Should be fun to watch what they're able to do here. And I think with McQueen, I'm rooting for him to really get through this back injury and really show what he was able to do through his Western Hockey League career before the injury. I get a sip of water here before I talk about Kashan Aitchison. So for Kashan Aitchison, he's been a big riser, and I think for a good reason. Shows the physicality. Has really shown it offensively too. 26 goals in the OHL is really impressive. I think there's a lot to like with Kashan. I thought he really handled last year well with the Nathan Villeneuve situation in terms of what happened there. I thought he was very mature about it, and I think he's proven that he's got a chip on his shoulder and he's able to play the throwback style game that a lot of teams want. And that, as a result, is going to help him rise quite a bit in the draft. I think, would it surprise me to see him in the 10s through 13 area? No, not at all, because I think he's got that type of upside to his game. I like him a lot defensively. I don't know if I like him more than Cam Reed or Jackson Smith. I think Central Scouting is a little bit overrating him at this point, but he's a fun player to watch. I think he's a very impactful player. He'll have a good NHL career. I just don't know that he will be more than just a second pairing defenseman. And for me to take a swing on that in the top 10, I don't know if that's smart. I think in the teens it's a little smarter, and I think he might get there. But that's ultimately up to the scouts and what they decide. Looking at the rest of the list here, I think I said my thoughts on Jackson Smith already. I think he's a little too low in this ranking. I would say the same thing for Malcolm Spence. Malcolm Spence, to me, should be a no-question top 20 player in this draft. I don't care that his upside isn't super sexy. I think his overall game and what he's able to do, he is very well-rounded at the pro level already. I think he's going to prove that he's going to be, at the very least, a middle six forward that's going to put up 50, 60 points at any point in the NHL. He has shown that time and again. I would be very surprised if he never hits his upside, but I look at him and I see just a really, really solid player in Malcolm Spence. So for me to see him that low, I think is a lot of over scouting, in my opinion. Going into the rest of this list here, Cam Reed at 23 is super low for me. I would have him probably in the top 10, if not top 15. The rest of the list here, I'm going to talk a little bit here about Mason West. West, to me, is a guy who, people are looking at him and they see Anders Lee. That's not fair. It's not fair to the kid. I think he had a really good Minnesota high school state tournament. Before that point, nobody had really put him in this top 3 round discussion. Now all of a sudden he's being floated around in first rounds. He may not even choose hockey. The kid's really good at football too. He might decide to go to D1 football. Yes, is he a really good player at the Michigan or Minnesota high school level? Absolutely. Does that translate all the time? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You can look at Riley Tufte or you can look at Nick Bukestad. Nick Bukestad has had a 12-year career in the National Hockey League, has done a lot of great things. There's a lot to like with Nick Bukestad. Or you can look at Riley Tufte, a kid who's another big kid, great size, never really found it past the AHL level and is still there. It can go either way. And for me, I think he's more of a 45 to 60 pick, in my opinion, if you're going to pick him there. I would be more inclined to pick him closer to the 4th or 5th round. I just think he has to show me more, and he's got to do it at the USHL level. It's pretty insane to rank him as high as they have. Bill Zonnin's ranked pretty low comparatively to what I've seen him publicly. I would probably put Bill Zonnin just outside the 1st round, if not 2nd round. I think he's a really impactful player. He's done really good at the QMJHL level. There's more to his game than I think a lot of people realize, and I think he's got definite checking line upside with some scoring touch. You might put him on your 2nd power play. He's proven to be very versatile. Cole Reshney, you already know my thoughts on that if you follow the channel at all. Cole is a guy who I had him in top 5 at early part of the year. I feel like I still should put him there. He's at number 9 on my rank right now. To have him here at 25 is just, you're not watching. You're clearly not watching. You're throwing him out there on a ranking based on your height and everything else. I think it's clear that people don't recognize the value in this game. And then going through the rest here, I'll get into some small stuff here. Obviously, a guy who's been talked about a lot is Hyoxi Wang, who plays for the OHL and played earlier in the OJHL for the King Rebellion, now playing for the Oshawa Generals. Unbelievable skater at his size. He's definitely, comparing a guy like Radim Murta to him, I think he's light years ahead in his skating ability. His edge work is super impressive. He's a great accelerator. Skating-wise, he's phenomenal to watch and is absolutely a top 5 skater in this draft. But what else does he bring? He doesn't bring anything else. He's just a big guy who can skate really well. Can you teach the rest of it? Sure you can. But if he's not proving it at the junior level, he's 2 points in 32 games at the junior level. That's it. To me, it tells me he's not ready for the OHL level. He's just not. He should have probably stayed in the OJHL. He probably should have allowed himself more time there. And I think there's more to prove for him. He would be a major, major project pick. As much as I love seeing kids from non-traditional countries get into the sport of hockey, he is coming from an environment that, he's played in Canada for a few years now, but he is not at the level he should be to play at the OHL level right now. He's there purely because scouts wanted him there. And I think he's shown that he is not ready to even leave juniors, let alone get drafted. To me, I would not draft Simon Wong if you paid me. I would not do it. It doesn't make sense. It's buyer beware. He would be on my do not draft list. There's just too much projection that has to be done with him. And if you want to fall into that trap, go ahead and do that. Look at what Logan Stanley's turned into. Logan Stanley's barely a serviceable NHL defenseman. Clearly not able to handle the NHL level. I think there's similar concerns to have with Hyoxi Wang. Ivan Ryabkin here at 35. Obviously, there's some attitude concerns. Seeing his teammate Vaclav Nestrasil right next to him, looking at their production, I think they're very similar players. I like Ryabkin a little bit more. I do like Nestrasil a lot. I think he's very deserving of being in this ranking. But it's interesting to see the dynamic there is there. Going into the rest of this list here, I think Ben Cavan is a guy who should be ranked a little higher. I've already talked about him. We can get into the rest here. A guy who's found himself on North American radars, which is interesting because he's actually an international prospect. But Bruno Isdon, or Idson, I should say, has played really well at the USHL level, played over a point per game, and has been very, very good at the USHL level for being a U18 player. He's coming into a different country from Croatia to here. It's a massive change for somebody to have in the middle of their season. And if he's been able to do that as successfully as he has, to me, it shows his work ethic. I think it shows what he's been capable of being able to do. And now he's got premium development opportunities in front of him, probably for the first time in his life. It should be fun to watch his growth and his development. That's the kind of upside grab you need to grab. Somebody who's produced at a high-end level compared to somebody who looks like they could produce at the high-end level. If you can produce and you can provide points, regardless of whether you're a forward or defenseman, I'm taking you all day compared to the guy who is, who's said to be a project pick. And, you look at the what ifs too much when you look at players like Hyuk Wong. I think there's a clear dichotomy there. And personally, I'd be leaning Eidslin all day. Going into the rest of this here, I talked about Carlos Hundel. A guy who's fallen a ton for me is Emil Guite. Just really been a disappointing draft year for him. Needs to show a lot more. I don't think he'll make the U18 roster this year, which is really surprising compared to where I had him as a top 10 pick earlier in the year. He's probably had one of the bigger draft year falls I've seen in a long time, and I hope he can find his game again because I think the skill set that's there is really intriguing, but when you don't have it mentally, there's a lot you got to work on. Then we're going into the rest here. I don't have any real standouts past 100. I'll talk about a few players here. Anthony Alain Samake, he's got 14 points. He hasn't scored a goal at the USHL level. I want a little more offense from him, but there's a great depth in what he's able to bring outside of that. He's very good defensively, and he's a great skater. I don't know if I draft him this year. I think he hasn't shown the progression I would like. I like him a lot as a prospect, but I think next year is his year personally. So we'll see. Some team is going to definitely take him in the later round, but personally, I think he should be an overage candidate in my opinion. And then Aiden Lane is a guy who I have a lot of time for. Definitely a guy you're going to see as a sleeper later on in the draft. Let's see here. Giovanni DeJulian is a double overager. Really impressive in terms of what he's been able to do for Lincoln. First year playing at the USHL level, averaging almost a point per game. He's proven it time and again. He's going to play at the NCAA level and play for Brown. Should be fun to see where his growth and his development will go. I think he's a really intriguing player to watch out for. And, the rest of the list here, we'll get into the rest. I've already talked about LJ Mooney. So we can get into the rest. You guys can leave questions on anything else you guys want to have on here, but I'm going to go now to the goalies. So let me go ahead and, share my screen real quick. I kicked out of that. So now going to the goalies here. The rankings here, I think they're a little different than what I'm used to seeing. I personally think, it's not really a strong North American class in my opinion. Ravensburgen's held the top spot for a while. I don't know that I see number one goalie out of him. I want to like him a lot. He's a huge kid. He's 6'6", 200 pounds, can move really well. I just don't know that he's that high end. I don't think there's a lot of high end goalies in this draft. I think this is a draft to where you want to find the sleepers. Of the people that I think could be sleepers, you look at a guy like Cameron Hendrickson. This is a guy I think is a real good sleeper pick. A lot of people are betting on sizes with these guys. That's why guys like Trenton Bennett and, Louis Antoine Deneau. There's such an uncertainty with the goaltending depth in this draft. People are just shooting challenges here and trying to find guys, that might be able to find it here. Noah Tegelar is a guy who I think could be a real sleeper as well. I look at him like a Devin Levi style goaltender. Not necessarily, they're not similar in size or similar in play style, but in terms of the development path, it's very similar. Coming from the CCHL level, and he's now playing in the OHL and finding his game. And if it weren't for the rule change, I don't know that he would be making the move to the OHL so quickly. But that's the group there. I think it's a really weak crop for North America this year. Going into now the international, I'm going to go to the international goalies real quick and talk about them. There's not as many international goalies drafted, but I really like Pyotr Andreyanov. A little bit of a character issue in terms of, his actions after losing some games are not the greatest. I think his attitude is a little more than prominent in most games. I think he's got a little bit too much of an ego, but my God, is this kid talented. He's now measuring at about 6. They have him at 6 foot here. Elite Prospects has him at 6'2". That's a major difference between 6 foot and 6'2" when you're talking about goaltender development. If he's closer to 6'2", I think there is a real one goaltender starter in this, and even if he's at 6 foot, his mobility is super solid. The MHL has proven to produce some great goaltenders. He's going to get some KHL time, I think, with the Red Army, probably next year. A lot to like with his game and what he's able to provide. If anybody sneaks into the first round as a goaltender, I think it's him. And I don't expect anybody else to really be even in the top 45. I just think that's probably when goalies will start to fall, is around 45, 50. He won't likely be in that group, but I wouldn't be surprised if a team really needs a goaltender. They're going to look to him, I think, as being their high-end upside guy. And the rest of the guys in this here, I got time for Frolov. I like him. I like Neuenschwander, Goose and Hermstrom I've talked about. And, the other guys in this grouping, there's some intrigue. They're going to play themselves in the U18s. I think it should be fun to see where their game goes ultimately. And then going into the international skaters here, this will be the last thing I talk about before I go ahead and take any questions, if there will be any. Obviously looking at this group, I think the strength in this class is in the Europeans. I like Frundell and Eklund a lot. Both of them, to me, seem like they're clear favorites out of the international class. Just love what they're able to provide. I think they're both going to be pro ready within 18 to 24 months. They're both guys that are going to impact their NHL teams. Whoever drafts them, they're going to find ways to get them in the lineup sooner rather than later. I've talked about them ad nauseum. I don't need to get more into it. Zarovsky is a really intriguing guy coming from the NMHL, which is the league under the MHL, and being dominant in his D-1 draft, his D-1 year, and then coming into his draft year and having the performance he's had in the MHL. There's certainly intrigue in terms of what he's been able to do and his growth in his game. I'm not ready to rank him yet because I haven't really caught like an accurate viewing of him in terms of I've seen highlights, I've seen different clips I like. I haven't seen him in a full game situation just because I haven't caught an UFA game this year. I think there's definite things you like in his development, what he's been able to grow into. I just need to see more for me to rank him appropriately. And obviously Central Scouting is very high on him. Whether or not that's a little bit recency biased, I think there's a little bit of that factors into the ranking, but it should be interesting what they're able to say about him and his growth going forward for the rest of the year. Milton Gastrin is a guy, to me, I think there's some warts in his game. I don't know that I agree that he's here at 3. Shihash, same thing, 9 points in 43 games at the pro level. Probably should have been playing juniors this year, probably in North America. Probably should have taken the Adam Banach route. Adam Banach really struggled at the Czech pro level. It has now parlayed himself into a pretty good junior season and has found the right development opportunity for him. Eddie Genborg is, to me, again, you're looking at him just from a checking perspective. He's really aggressively ranked here. I probably would not consider him until at least 60. I just think there's just not enough enticing things in this game to really want him to go any higher. I really like the Swedish class. I've already talked a lot about those guys in terms of what they've been able to provide. Ben Reutenen, I've been on this guy now for several years. He's a double overager, an 05 born player who has been excellent for Tappara this year. 33 points in 50 games at the Finnish pro level. This is his last year to get drafted. I would have to think this kid's going to fall somewhere in the second or third round. He's going to have to get drafted here. He's too talented to be missed on a third time. He's really progressed immensely. He played decently well at the under 20 level. I think I expect a little more dominance from him, but he's definitely got to watch for. Definitely somebody you want to keep on your radar, no question. Roman Lutsev is a guy who I like a lot too. Should have a really interesting and intriguing game in terms of, whether or not he ever comes to the NHL or the North American game. I'm not sure. I don't know his personal situation enough to talk about that and without being speculative, but he seems to have a very North American patterned game in terms of he really likes to operate in tight spaces. He's very skilled at stick handling in tight spaces. I think he's got typical Russian attributes that you see out of players in terms of their skating ability, their edge work. Everything is really impressive in that regard. It should be fun to see what he's able to do and what kind of player you're looking at going forward for the rest of this year. Then you go into some other players that are available right now. Nobody that's really standing out here. Walter Lindbergh here is ranked at 90. I think that's a little low for him personally. I've liked what he's been able to do. Despite the fact he hasn't scored a lot in the Swedish pro level, he's been super dominant at the junior level. He's going to need a little more time, I think, to adjust to the pro level. So I like him as a pick here before anybody else gets him, but I think you're not expecting him to be picked before the 4th or 5th round. I don't know that it's worth the risk. Another guy who was not ranked previously, but he is now, is Mikhail Melikov. I've had this guy aggressively ranked, like Yegor Chinnikov I had in the first round. I have this kid just outside my first round right now. I got a lot of time for this guy. He's proven it at every tournament that he's been able to play in. He's been super, super impressive to watch. Really like his overall game. I think there's a lot of skill, a lot of potential within his game. There's just more to be unlocked. There's more to the eye in watching him than I think a lot of people see initially. I got a lot of time for him. I think he's by far and away one of the more underrated guys in this draft. Going into the rest of this here, Jaromir Perez is a Spanish player. That's fun. Never really been a Spanish player in the National Hockey League, so that would be interesting to see if he were to get drafted. That would be pretty cool to see from a non-traditional hockey perspective. Low-key rooting for that a little bit. And going into the rest here, another guy who has been ranked here a couple times, and I really don't understand why, is Noah Sansakitala. He's a French-Belgian dual net. And, in France, he's just, he's a good player for French juniors, right? Like he's been really impressive in terms of what he's done for the French national team. But is he draft eligible style? I don't know. I think there's too much unproven qualities to his game to really think that he should be ranked here. I mean, I look at some other guys I've had ranked, within my personal ranking. I look at a guy like, you can look at Pajus Prankskevich. He's a shorter guy, but he's been dominant for Lithuania. Like, there's different guys that are at these, Edvardsen Sorensen, who's on the U18 roster for Norway, but he's not in this ranking. There's just a lot of different players you look at, and you wonder, they should probably be ranked here. They should be identified. They should be ranked here in some way, shape, or form. I think that's an oversight by Central Scouting in terms of not ranking these non-traditional guys as much as possible, but it should be interesting to see where this goes from here. I don't know that Central Scouting covers these non-traditional countries enough, especially when they're already in established leagues like Sweden, Finland, Canada, different things like that. There needs to be more identification in terms of that. I think sometimes Central Scouting fails on the international side because of that. And then, we get into the rest of this here. I don't really have, other than Zubek I mentioned earlier, there's just not a lot of intrigue late rounds. So going into the rest of this here, I don't see any questions off to the side. If you guys have any additional questions after this, feel free to leave them on the side here or on the comment on the video itself. If nothing else, thank you again for watching. Really appreciate you guys being on here. And, if you haven't followed, please follow me on Instagram, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitter. Do everything you can to kind of engage within the content. I want to have more engagement on the channel. So if you're a prospect and you're hiding in the shadows, please do yourself a favor. Please subscribe. Please engage. Please allow yourself to see what's on here. At the very least, thank you so much if you're watching from afar. Otherwise, arrivederci, and I'll see you guys in the next video.